Um, First of all, wanting to welcome you, Iwan Brioche, and thanking you for joining this third episode of this podcast series of ImaginAction.
Thanks,
So,
Yuri. And it's brioche, not
brioche. Okay,
not the
Iwan
French bread,
Brioche. Yeah,
brioche.
yeah. Brioche is the thing you eat. So, brioche. I think it's the Italian that is confusing me because there is a more like a the C becomes more softish thing. Brioche. Yeah. So yeah, actually, where does this name come from?
But that's a funny story. You know, my real name is Jones, like almost half the people in Wales. I'm from Wales. And when I started acting, and I couldn't join the union with that name because, somebody else had that name. And I was working in theatre, and a colleague told me, well, just take the name of the street you were born on. That's what I did. So I was born on a street called St. Brioche Road in Cardiff. And so I said, okay, Iwan Brioche. And then I found out that's what porn stars do. So I've got a kind of porn star name, but it's stuck, and there's only one Iwan Brioche in the world, apparently. So.
You can still become a porn star in the future. So. uh, so wow, that's a great story. So actually, we have a official series of questions, but then I might
Oh, cool.
diverge. I might diverge where I'm using the same sequence that I'm also kind of developing as we're going forward in this series. We already interviewed David Diamond, that I think you know about his work or probably met him.
Never met David, but
Yeah, and Ron Bansal, I probably you don't know because it's not in our direct Theatre of the Press network, but he's been doing very interesting work. He's a good friend, and Mark Weinblatt was the last interview, and we have a few more lined up. And this is kind of this podcast, this kind of series, is part of the kind of adaptation and relaunching of ImaginAction as a platform for social arts across borders, and kind of trying to. Uh, I think that we're trying to do more than one thing, but there is a sense of, I think, harvesting a kind of knowledge or wisdom that has been developed, co-developed worldwide in parallel. Many people that know each other, but maybe not always sharing and having a platform to exchange that. So that's definitely one thing. And I think also I feel like there is a sort of service to make that visible, what we do, and
mm,
to understand what we do for ourselves, and then also for the other people that might fund our projects and might
yeah, it's really
because
good.
um,
My dog there is
yeah, it's okay. We're
finding.
we're
Okay,
we're
yeah,
in
but that's
free
great.
time.
I love it. Really is. You're doing a really important service, Yuri. With this, I think it's great. Doesn't happen enough.
Yeah, yeah, and we also have like someone editing. Although it's nice to have like you know everything comes in, everything is part of our social fields. So, and I guess the first question is, and so we are calling it social arts because it's a kind of a large area that includes theater, theater of the oppressed or social theater kind of work, and also more arts world, so also visual and other types of work, but also the social arts, which is kind of in between the anyone that is using arts or theater or even a poetic approach to social change in a way. So it's a kind of part change and making and innovation and arts and so the first question we're asking people is, what was your doorway? How did you get to do what you do? What was your way in to this work, to this line of work?
Uh, this will stop soon, I think. Somebody's coming to the door. Um, So I guess, we all have, what I love about this work is that we have our epiphanies, everybody has an epiphany, well, lots of them. I guess one of the first ones for me was, I was in a kind of a comprehensive school, about 14, 15, and a guy turns up with a film reel under his arm and asks the head teacher if he could show it to the school. And, it was just, this wouldn't happen nowadays, but this guy, I'm trying to remember his name now, he's quite a famous film director, and the film he showed us was The War Game. And he was commissioned to make this film by the BBC, and they banned it. They banned it for about 30 years because it was one of these first films that appeared to be a documentary, and it was in black and white, and it was about what would happen if a 1 megaton nuclear bomb landed on London. And it was such a visceral, powerful experience that it just woke me up at that age. And there are two undeniable facts that came to me there. Which I couldn't be indifferent to this. I had to commit to trying to change the world. And the second was that an aesthetic experience can be totally transformative. It can change your reality. So those were the two things that I dabbled with, and I worked in film, and then I worked in theatre and education. And the next gateway, if you like, was experiencing a workshop with Adrian Jackson, which we both know, and then becoming his kind of apprentice and leaving TIE and working in Theatre of the Oppressed. So first of all, I'm a Theatre of the Oppressed joker or practitioner. And doing that for many years, and I was working with a company in Wales so we were working not exclusively with any one kind of oppression. We worked with all kinds of oppression. And we were working day in, day out with people experiencing oppression. And it starts to affect me personally, because you just feel sometimes it's a theatre of helplessness, or the theatre of the depressed. It would often happen. And I guess that's where the second gateway happened, which was experiencing the work of Enrique Vargas, a Colombian theatre anthropologist based in Barcelona, with a company called Teatros de los Sentidos. And he kind of provided another mode of theatre that just blew me away. And then the next opportunity I had, I wanted to do that, but with an applied kind of ethic to it. So that's where sensory labyrinth theatre, maybe I've jumped ahead, but that's where sensory labyrinth theatre came from, as a kind of need to balance the theatre of the oppressed and the kind of dwelling on the oppressions to, I wouldn't say it's not utopia, but a kind of something that works on a different level, and they complement each other. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's great. And yeah, I want to take the opportunity is that, well, we actually never met in person. We had several great conversations on Skype, Zoom, video calls. Mm-hmm. But I am very aware of your work through other people, and reading publications. Yeah, so I think, for people listening, I think there have been many names to what you do, because I remember there was a Sensory Labyrinth, and then the Republic of the Imagination. That was a whole project, and I, you also sometimes use I think you context-based or context-oriented theater. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you're also, I read an article with your old name, with John's, the academic, which I love, and I definitely want to talk about it, and which you're bringing together mindfulness and theater as in a single framework. And basically, if I get it right, framing theater as a social mindfulness or social awareness practice, which I found fascinating. And trying to move to that second question and connect that with that, which is about what have been, looking back at your work and all this continuous, maybe continuing evolution of the work. What is guiding you? What are the principles of your work that are guiding you in this process?
Okay. Principles that guide me. Yeah, it's. I mean, they're consistent with the principles that guide all of us. I wouldn't say I'm a Marxist. I went to a school established by somebody called Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was I don't know what you call him, a teacher, a thinker. But he developed what's called teachings. Most people kind of come to Krishnamurti through a Van Morrison album called No Guru, No Teacher. So he was somebody who didn't follow Krishnamurti, but was influenced by him. So Krishnamurti was very much about awareness in the moment, what's happening right now. And theatre became for me a gateway for that, to be able to explore with people. I love working with people and exploring together what this experience of being alive is at that most basic level. Politics is there, politics is happening. But my argument for, and this comes to theatre the oppressed as well, is that, doing theatre the oppressed, doing form theatre is the revolution. Creating that stage where people come together and what I call kind of like the large human collider, the large Hadron Collider in Geneva smashes these particles together and releases subparticles, and they study quantum effects. Now, I believe this very strongly. It's not, we can use it as a metaphor, but theatre is a large human collider. And when you bang these particles together, and when I say particles, I mean the idea of individuals together, and you release this quantum effect, which is this feeling of what Boal used to say communion, but it's also communitas, this anthropological experience that all indigenous people create through rites of passage, which is this experience of unity that destroys the illusion that we're separate. So you asked me what my principle is to destroy the illusion that we are separate.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. This Hadron Collider and this image and the state almost feels like, yeah, and I think there are a lot of really interesting science now that is going to be able to back some of what we're talking about almost.
Sure. Yeah, not just in quantum physics, but in studying consciousness and the brain, and what's called the projective consciousness model. I think we talked about that. This is the latest and most kind of consistently accepted model of consciousness that's arisen, in science so far, and it's absolutely fascinating what Carl Friston and his team are discovering there.
So the next question is really about, so again, it's more about like the path and this path of the social arts facilitator and explorer and researcher. And the question is about frustrations and challenges. What have been the main frustrations or challenges you have met doing this work?
Well, there's a lot. In about the same time I started doing sensory labyrinth theatre, I also did a legislative theatre project. I think it was one of the largest, after Boal's experiments in Rio, and it was funded by the Welsh government. And we worked with 22 groups all over Wales, looking at all the different legislature that would help them. and it was funded by the assembly, and we made a big event outside, and lots of civil servants got involved, the people who basically run things, and it did influence policy, but not one politician came. And this was the frustration for me, is that they didn't come because theatre didn't have credibility. The idea that legislature was serious, so they couldn't associate with it being created through some kind of theatrical process. And yet, you know, when you work in politics or in law, when you see them operate, it's all theatre. I mean, it's theatre which is kind of has this cynicism to it. So for me, the main frustration throughout my work has been this credibility gap. That you work in theatre, or it's entertainment, and yet, you know, and it's I think it's a much wider issue as well, you know, and you talked about earlier about how context-oriented arts, and we'll get to that in a minute. As theatre as a vehicle for social awareness, it's much more than that. And this harks back to Boal's story of you know, the invention of theatre, the theatre being the first invention of humans. You know, it's what creates self-consciousness, the ability to see ourselves in the past and future. And he kind of, it's interesting to wonder to what extent that was a metaphor for him, or actually, you know, how serious can we take that metaphor? Isn't it actually possible that consciousness at the level we're working with is theatre? You know, they're not indistinguishable. And that's what the theory of context-oriented arts looks at. So I kind of come up against this wall all the time, and that's the main frustration, is that this idea that I'm serious and I don't involve myself in dramatics, and yet my whole life is framed by dramatics, you know. And there's this other thing over here, which is theatre, which is there for entertainment or to escape, you know, and or therapy, which is even worse, you know, often, and they just, it's almost always trying to hold it at arm's length, and trying to reduce that distance it's been a frustration.
Yeah. I by the way, we're on recording on the 3rd of November. There is a whole theater show happening in the US. And I just, you know, I was exchanging some emails with Arawana about my teacher of social pressing theater. And this thing came up, and I was basically saying, I feel there is certain things that are theater that are not calling themselves theater, and there is a sort of intellectual incoherency in the fact that they don't recognize themselves as theater. And I was giving examples to transformative processes, which I know people doing, for example, constellation and process work, which I feel are doing representation. Because I feel when you do representation, at some level, you're doing theater. When someone is taking a role, then there is and there is someone else watching them in that role. There is an element of theater. And I also say that politics are theater in that sense, you know, that, and the problem is that we don't recognize them as such. And when we don't recognize them as such, we can confuse them to be real. and that's not good theater, you know, in the sense that that's even dangerous on a psychosocial level, because it really creates a sort of and I feel we are living in this world, and when politics in particular and news is creating this kind of mass schizophrenic reaction as you know, as a way, in a way, the election and the possible re-election of, or it doesn't matter if he gets re-elected or not, the fact that he was already elected, and the way that this show is going on, I think really shows us how schizophrenic it's all has become somehow.
Yeah, and that was planned. I mean, this is the horror of it. you know, this is you know, Putin's Rasputin. Is it Sarkov, or was an experimental theater director? You know, and it's documented that he just thought, well, you know, what we can do is turn it all into theater, and nobody, there's no reality, there's no ground on which to stand on to protest, because we'll support the left wing in the morning and the right wing in the afternoon. Nobody will know what's happening. And that disorientation is exactly what is happening in America, you know, and how it can, you know, just one big lie after another, and you just don't have any solid ground in which to be an activist. And I think that's why the Black Lives Matter movement, and, you know, coalesced around the incident, you know, some months back. Those concrete things, you know, it needs those concrete things and to grow around, rather than some theories or you know, some political movements. Now it's about concrete things.
So yeah, we kind of drifted into politics, but I want to bring that back to the path of you know, engaging in this work, and we are thinking about the listeners and people that are in that path or might be there or want, well, this question is about the gifts. What has been the gifts of doing this work? What have you found? What have been the gifts or the treasures in doing this line of work?
So I'm going to try and answer this in connection with what we've just been talking about, because, you know, you're a joker, I'm a joker. We're experienced with interventions from the public, and I used to love playing up to the oppressor, and we talked about this confusion of taking the theater, the character I'm playing, to be real. Where does that end? You know, where does the pretense stop? So we can easily see when the policeman is wearing what's, you know, the agentic personality, what Milgram talked about, how people can do bad things to other people because they hide behind these official masks by the, you know, the uniform of the policeman or the judge, or the, and when there's an intervention, I guess there's two kind of paths to the interaction, to generalize massively. One is the kind of the horizontal, which is to organize with people on the same level as you, and the other one is vertical, to try and address the agentic personality, to try and break the mask. And the epiphanies I've experienced in Theatre Oppressed are all been about the breaking of that mask, and the agentic personality breaking. But what's interesting is many people in form theatre don't think that's the function of form theatre, to try and change the oppressor's behavior. It's more horizontal, to try and organize and change things. But what we've seen politically, to be honest, is that doesn't work anymore around the world. It hasn't worked. Didn't work in Tunisia and Egypt. It's not worked in China or Hong Kong. You know, it's not worked in America. So maybe we were wrong to not look at how do we change, how do we destroy the agentic personality, how do we destroy all our masks, and that's for me what theatre is about. And the gift for me is being able to break a lot of masks that I had, and to go to places of I don't want to say wisdom, but places of a depth with people, not by myself meditating in a cave, but working with people to arrive at places which went beyond time and space, and led to profound changes for us all, you know, engaged in that. I feel very, very, very blessed I had this guy who worked for Coca-Cola or Pepsi was in the Balkans, and he only was dragged along to see a sensory labyrinth because his wife used to work with me, and he went in his posh suit through this labyrinth, and you know, it's top executive, and he came out in the end and said, You are blessed to share such information. I thought, you got it. This is what it is. We're just sharing this information, which is that we're all, I mean, it sounds so blooming hippie, but we're all one. But when you experience that through this work, and we experience it through Theatre of the Oppressed, we experience it through great theatre in all its forms, great art in all its forms, then that's why I do it. That's the gift to me.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, well, yeah, the next one is sort of at the same line, and it's about, again, thinking about someone that is just starting this path, and it could be even you when you were starting it, or someone right now. What would you, what advice would you give to someone starting this adventure now?
Well, I wouldn't dare give anybody advice about that. I'll tell you what helped me is to have a role model, you know, to have somebody that you just, like for me, it was Adrian Jackson. When I saw him jokering, it was just the way he did it. I wanted to be like him, and that's a good place to start. And then you just find your own way after that. But finding somebody who you, not somebody because you know their name, but because they've just turned you on, with what they do, and really study them and study how they do it and try and be them, and then get better than them, or it kind of helps you on your trajectory, rather than, because a lot of people just feel that that's the opposite to what most people say, isn't it? Just be yourself. But sometimes I know it takes a lot of confidence to start in this work, and people do it sometimes. And well, how can I say this? It's fine to make mistakes, is basically what I'm saying. You just start, I made some huge mistakes. I mean, one of the first Theatre of the Oppressed workshops I did, people ended up in hospital fighting, So, but if you see somebody who inspires you, often you end up feeling that this is what you have to do. This is very muddled. This sounds sorry.
Yeah, it sounds very practical actually, and I connected with what you brought before, this illusion that we're individuals, and I think as interesting is the declaration that you said, that is very common, be yourself, which is we can, but at the same time it's it celebrates, at some level we can say, being authentic, but at the same time it celebrates be different, be separated somehow. And I like this, like, be connected. And I also hear something around mentoring, which is one of the things that we are trying to create with ImaginAction, and it has been for me, meeting Hector and working with him in such a it has been, I was doing Theatre of the Oppressed before, but it was bringing something else, and it's really not about necessarily just being like him, but there is something there that is a relationship and an understanding that is cultivated, and is a sort of exchange, which sometimes it's being like, and sometimes it's contrasting.
Yeah.
So, but it so the idea with the mentor, that is not a teacher that is knows everything, but it's someone more ahead in the road than you.
Find somebody that inspires you and work with them. I guess that's the way I would say it.
Yeah, that's great. So, well, the next set of question is about now, and looking from the now. And I know that you have an exercise that is about going to the now also. And the first question is what are you busy with right now? What makes you, what are you busy with?
Well, yeah, we talked just before you started recording about the project I'm developing. There's a lot, because of the pandemic, there's a lot going online, like we are now talking. And a lot of my work at the moment is teaching online. I teach mindfulness. We never got to that, but it doesn't matter. But I teach teachers mindfulness in schools. And I'm also developing curricula to teach mindfulness more creatively than the current curricula. But we also have this other counter will, if you like, which is to get away from the screen, and how can we work with digital means to orient attention towards the moment off the screen. Kind of sounds counterintuitive, but I'm kind of curious about augmented reality, the way that Pokemon game got people out, to look for things and lost and in places. I know that it's the case that people found dead bodies because they went to these locations that nobody'd been to in years looking for Pokemon, But that kind of idea of getting people in the streets searching and yeah, the phone is their guide, the smartphone is their guide, but what it connects them to is a kind of social history of their square mile, which maybe they weren't aware of, but which is also really powerfully transformative for them. It's creating a new relationship, not through a screen, but to reality, to the sense of place. So that's one of the things I'm doing. The other thing I'm doing, so when you work in sensory labyrinth theater, your consciousness starts to change. And you start to enter what I think is called, in Taoism, is called Wu Wei. It's kind of this sense of flow. And it's not constant, it's kind of, if you work in the labyrinth a lot, when you come out, you're still there, you're still in this sense of flow. And I was curious about what would a political structure look like, which supported this sense of flow. And I came up with a concept called Hreocracy, which is rule by flow. And I've been trying to theorize about that and describe it. So that's my theoretical aspect. It hasn't manifested in anything concrete at the moment, but it is linked to some ideas.
It's fascinating, and I feel very connected to you. I think we're working on the same transmission. I'm working on a technology app. I talked about well-being mapping, and I think it could be used for the first thing you described. And the second thing is I'm not really working on that, but I did write about this world, a regenerative world that happens in the near future, and it has certain elements to it. So I think I saw a sort of like you can get like a vision of how it could be, but I don't really know how it gets there, So so I'm very curious of what is the scalable next step towards that world that I saw that I think is possible, because what I realize when I speak about that world, sometimes it gets someone that understands, but obviously it's out there, right? So how to get the future to now, right? And yeah, and well, I guess I want to connect it to the next question is about how can social arts support humanity in this moment of transition?
Okay. I think the way the future's going, the world is being divided into content creators and content consumers. And I've mentioned before that the artist in the future won't create content. They won't create something for you to experience. They'll create context. So those are context is this elusive thing, which is, you know, who is experiencing this right now. You know, there's an observer, then there's the observed. So we're observing each other, but there is something that is doing the observing. So context is orienting towards inquiring, having that curiosity to explore who is this person experiencing this? What is experiencing this? And that's the function of context-oriented art, is to, if you like, fall awake to this miracle of being alive, is one form way of saying it, but a more subtle level, it's actually trying to pull back and connect with who we really are. So a lot of our efforts to change society has come with a kind of political will, often from the left, or a moral or ethical will. But I think, and when we talk about the context of social awareness, it's often awareness of these ethics, you know, of, for instance, the basis of it is the golden rule, you know, which is treat others as I want to be treated myself, you know, and that's the basis of all religions, really, in some ways. But it hasn't worked. And you know, we can see it hasn't worked. It isn't working. So when I talk about awareness, I talk about awareness of this implicate order, if you like, this thing that is beneath everything, which is this benevolence and this oneness. And we can only experience that through some transformative experiences using theater. When you experience that, compassion is spontaneous, it emerges, and it's a natural property. And I think that's the step that we need to take, is turn our theater, this large human collider, into a way that we can work to create the communitas, the sense of oneness, which is not a moral platform or a theory, but a lived experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a series of residencies that I called comunitas, and we did it in several places. The main elements that were there, and maybe one day I'll repeat them. It was the mix of experience, in the sense that we were residential. We were in the same place for about a week. In the morning, we were doing something with our hands. So either building a garden or building a kind of a hobbit house in one other place. And so there was like some permaculture small project that we can kind of do in this 1 week. And then we did theater or arts or some dreaming work in the afternoon and the evening. And we were, cooking for ourselves, and so we had this, and the communitas, not the right idea, is this kind of the spirit of community, which also is a temporary thing. So I also feel like that we were kind of there for a week, but it's not that we had the plan or the idea to, be there forever, but just creating this experiment, right, of living in a certain way.
And Ryocracy is about how do we create that every day? Festivals manage to do it, don't they, all the time? People go to festivals and they just feel, also like earthquakes or something like that. Sometimes, I have a friend who was in Christchurch during the earthquake, and it just created this communitas that people came out on the street, put tables out, and everybody shared everything. And in fact, when it started to go back to normal, she had a kind of nervous breakdown because she'd seen what was possible. And then she realized that we've created a society to stop that happening. Because compassion in all infants is instinctive.
Yeah. So this connects well with the next question, which is, looking to the future, what is your wildest dream for the arts, for the world,
Mm-hmm.
for yourself.
Well, my kind of personal dream is to have a center, where I can teach this. And I constructed a permanent labyrinth in the forest, and I went there the other week, but it's all blown down now. It's kind of been destroyed, which was sad. But when you create a labyrinth and you're performing in it for a long time, and energy builds up, and there are people still doing this work. I'm not currently doing labyrinths, but there are people doing them in different countries, and they really create some kind of energy that and like your week workshop, people come at the end and say, I wish we could live like this the whole time. And creating that possibility is what I've been doing for the last 10 years, is how can I do this every time? How can we create a center where it's continuous? And then we infect a whole city with this, because Reocracy depends on this idea of it's called a parallel infrastructure. So you have the infrastructure of the society that dictates that we shouldn't be compassionate to each other. But what if we created a parallel infrastructure where we work with the people most available to do this, who are the refugees, homeless, asylum seekers, the people who are excluded by society. Let's create our own society modeled on these things. And it does happen spontaneously all the time, every day. But with with digital technology, how can we connect that? I wouldn't even say organize it, because the moment you start organizing it, then a whole bunch of other stuff comes. But just connecting it, and I love this word affordance, which means making it affordable to people, not financially, but just in terms of their attention and their awareness. And in my ideal world, and the parallel infrastructure just becomes so populated and so powerful and energized that people just discard their cars and their houses, and they just move to this other way of living, which is a constant festival.
Yeah, celebration, living in celebration. And in a way, probably we have that experience. It's probably not so different from how our ancestors experienced the world somehow. And I do some work around dragon dreaming, and it draws a lot from Australian Aboriginal philosophy and ways of knowing. They speak about the dream time, and and I really feel that in a way we're closing a circle here. And it's not that we all return to where we were, tens of thousands of years ago, but I think we're meeting this place from a new perspective somehow.
Well, the indigenous mindset is the only thing that's going to save this world, isn't it?
Yeah, and in a way, and that's what I feel. We need to become again indigenous, all of us.
Yeah.
We cannot just delegate being indigenous to certain marginalized groups that we scattered all over. Whereas like, oh, you're in the so what are we like? Yeah. And I really believe that theater is a way in. It's a way in to, even if you lost all your ancestry tree, even if I feel the theater and being in nature also is like a direct way in into that kind of awareness. Then it's hard to maintain somehow, mostly because there's a lot of pressure from the structures, which we might call oppressions, but the way things are structured. So the next set of questions is really about this network, and this network of social arts across social artists across borders, and Yeah, the first thing is really, and we're going through quite quick through the questions. It's great. You're very concise. I like it. And with David, we never got to that question. uh, but yeah, and it's about like, what would you, what would you like to receive or give in a network like that? What do you see as a benefit or something you would like to give or receive in an exchange in such a network?
Well, I love working with people. I just love people. Uh, just like, you mentioned the Republic of the Imagination before, and that was a network as well of people doing this work. The sensory labyrinth theatre work, um, and that still exists in some ways, but it's very difficult to make sensory labyrinth theatre work in the neoliberal world because it doesn't make any economic sense. It's about 15 people creating a performance for 30 people. Um, and it's yeah, it's senselessly taxing on your energy to be performing for maybe like 12 hours a day in this place with people coming through, and you give everything. You give everything, but you receive everything too. And the danger was at some point, well, the only way to make this work is to turn it into a religion or a cult. You know? So that's definitely not a route I wanted to take, but making the work viable, and, and how do you make the work viable? I think those practical questions, the practice, we thrive on sharing it, I think, but it's that how do you make this practical is something I think we could talk more about in the network, because I've been trying for years and I still have to do other work to fund
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, actually, what is coming up from this calls also, because with others I was not able to get to those questions, is that I think to organize a table conversation with more people.
Uh-huh.
So maybe have a few, inviting the people I interviewed now, and having this like as a round table conversation. And I think it would be great if you can join that, and then we can build on this.
I
Yeah,
think
also
so.
moving to the how. Yeah.
Well, I think what we'll be talking about probably mostly is the theory and stuff. I imagine, because that's what turns us on. But the nitty gritty, the how do we sustain this work
Mm.
is not interesting probably to. Also in neoliberalism, we have this atomization of our strategies. We don't want to share sometimes, and I see that a lot in these kind of networks. That we don't share the way we make this work.
Mm.
Maybe we'll find out we all have private income somewhere, somewhere, and it's. But how can we make it more of how it's the affordance thing basically? How can we work together to organize to create an affordance for people to do this? Uh, so it's an issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion, isn't it? As well, you know.
Yeah, and this is definitely came up already in the conversation somehow. So David, which theater for living, and he basically closed the company because he couldn't cope with fundraising, because he was fundraising every year to
Yeah,
pay people, and he
yeah,
said, I couldn't do it anymore.
yeah. Well, I'm exactly the same. I stopped doing that 5 years ago. I couldn't do it anymore. And then you just end up, you do a project, everybody loves it, and then you start from zero again. You know, and maybe that's how it should be for this work. Who knows? But
Yeah, I feel, and again, it could be that I'm wrong, but I feel there is we haven't invested enough energy in validating what we do. And we were not doing that because we were caught up with our work and not as much in exchanging and building, collective research, because that's the only way you can, because, the fact that Ewan managed to do it, or David, so they can attach it to David or Ewan or Adrian. So it becomes about the person or about even the name that they use, but it doesn't become about the greater. So when I was exchanging with Arawana in 2017, we met in a conference, was called Wisdom Together. I was giving the example of psychologists and how psychologists has, managed to validate themselves in front of society. And it wasn't in the beginning of psychology, it wasn't like that. In the 50s, it was the whole process with Anna Freud and, nephew of Freud, and a bunch of conferences. And they managed through, both good timing in the sense that there was like solving a problem that seemed urgent, like, yeah, soldiers coming back from the war and creating this kind of think tank. But then these massive conferences and massive work, which caused the fact that right now it's normal to think about the psychologist, but it wasn't like that before, and it
Yeah.
took a collective effort. And also what I noticed is that I never heard a psychologist, say something bad about a different kind of psychology, you know. Or a different psychologist, like they're not bothered with saying that they have the right psychology, they don't spend energy in that.
No.
uh, and although they are completely different,
Yeah.
I've been very against psychology until I found eco psychology, which I found very interesting because it unites this idea that ecology and psychology and our well-being is connected with something wider. But I just this thing, and what I was saying to her is, I think the goal is that within 10 years it's as normal to invite a social arts facilitator to a school if there is a problem as it is normal to invite a psychologist.
Yeah. That is slowly happening in Wales. We have a new curriculum in the education system, which is all based about creativity. And so I've been part of a project bringing artists into schools to work alongside teachers to get them to think more creatively about how they teach. And they're called creative practitioners. So, or some people call them social disruptors or something like this. So this kind of role is coming, but I think it's also, the reason is that, as people, activists, social activists, they're against institutions. The moment somebody becomes an institution, we attack them. And that's really there's a valid reason for that, because I really like the work of John McKnight, a Chicago sociologist, who says that institutions don't care about people. Even if they say they have a banner across their front door that says "We care about you," they don't, because they don't exist. Just like corporations, they're just another badge to hide, another mask to produce an agentic personality that dehumanizes the other person. And that's even for the UN and people like this. So I think there's something intrinsically anti-institution in us, and it's through institutions that psychology and people like that gain the credibility. So
yeah, probably. I think it's part of it. There is no like one institution for psychology also at the same time. They are in the business of creating institutions, and I think this emerged also in the theater world. Like institute starts to, and I'm yeah, anyway, it's a whole thing. But
yeah,
I
but we don't like those guys when they do
yeah,
that.
no, I think it's a trap. I think they don't realize that it's a trap, because what happens the moment you create an institute, you're in the business of selling knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's a trap. And I think sometimes it's good intentional traps.
But sustainability, sustainable development, for instance, that oxymoron comes from the idea of continuity, not sustainability. The continuity of my institution. Then you just basically feeding this thing. I mean, you're just feeding the survival of your institution is more important than the quality of your work. You know?
Mm.
When I mean the
Yeah.
quality of your work, the compassion of it, you know, and the willingness to run the same risks. That you know, beautiful phrase of Boal, you know, that solidarity means running the same risks. Having skin in the game. And institutions allow you to take the skin out of the game, don't they? And it's human to want to do that. It really is very human to want to do that, to have some solid ground to stand on. But you know, I love this quote by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche that, you know, we're falling through the sky. You know, there's no parachute. The bad news. So the bad news is we're falling through the sky. There's nothing to hold on to, and we don't have a parachute. But the good news is there's no ground. You know? And institutions is this grasping for something.
Mm. Yeah, and what raises for me is what's the alternative in a way. So, which I think is a question we're facing with ImaginAction as well. You know, what's the alternative? Right now, it's officially a nonprofit in the U.S. and a network of sort of freelance facilitators that are associating to each other and start to share and have a shared platform. And I think, yeah,
Beautiful. So networks are not institutions, are they? They're just people reaching out as they're falling in the sky and holding on to each other and making pretty patterns, you know?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, maybe we need like like I don't like a squadron, like a squadron of free falling parachuters, you know, doing
Yeah,
organized, you know, and like sports team of
yeah. And I love this. There's actually a word for it. You know, when ducks or geese are flying and they are organized into a V. So the person in the front flies for a while and takes the drag. You know, the others are flying and then they move around. You know, and that's kind of that's a kind of socialist concept in a way. This idea that we're always, you know, exchanging, but there's always somebody else that's going to lead. There's not one leader. There's just whoever's got the energy of the moment.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, like flocking, and there is an exercise I use it a lot, the flocking, and so there's like you go as a flock, and then there's someone comes out, and then
Mm-hmm.
you do something, and then he's back in the flock, and this kind
Yeah.
of flocking.
So one of the main concepts of reocracy, this way of governance, is what if nobody decided anything? What would happen?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, some people could be very, you know, resistant to that, you know, and you know, even ridicule it, you know, and you know, I don't know. I was like 12 and I was like in a safari in Kenya, and I remember seeing the gnu, you know, this animal that migrates in and, it was, and they, you know, they operate in this way. So we were just, they were crossing the road, da, 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 like all a bunch of them, and then someone changed direction, so they all of them crossed back to the other side. But so there was like no, like there is one started to run somewhere, and then they all start to run to that way, and then um but you know, I guess the question is not whether they arrive to the right destination, is like how is the experience of that. Is it a better experience than having like, oh, everybody go this way and like this way.
Yeah.
So
And there's that. I think it's in that. Like, there's a film. John Borman directed it. The Emerald Forest. You know, I mean, I don't know how accurate it is, but the chief of the indigenous people. You know, this guy says, "Why don't you tell him what to do?" You know, and he says, "Well, if I have to tell him what to do, I'm not the chief anymore." You know, you just facilitate him to decide for himself to emerge. You know, so at the moment decisions are made, hierarchy comes with decisions, doesn't it? If you know what I mean.
mm,
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it does bring something, this thing about a chief. And I was in Africa and I could see this wisdom, this
Yeah.
original wisdom. Because, and I feel because there is guidance here. It's not that he's living alone, that person. There is, it's a way of leading, and it's a
Yeah.
way of leading that we kind of lost touch with in the sort of modern Western, and which I find fascinating every time I go there. Also in the jokering, I see that. I see that in Joel, my friend from Senegal, and I call it leading from the back. So it's kind of, so even with his troop, you know, he's like very quiet, and he's like observing, and then at a certain point he kind of speak in his low voice, and then you know, like everything kind of moves, and there is no ordering around. It's like it's kind of holding the back area of the thing.
Beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, and I feel so. Yeah, we finished the questions. So we're just talking a little bit, but I just shared that before that I did the newspaper theater workshop for the university students this morning, and they created a small kind of improvisation um, from voicing to acting, and it was about PTSD in American soldiers, and they were kind of bringing a video, a music video that I didn't know, and then reading some text on. And I was writing, so I invited everybody as we were seeing the scenes to write down, to draw whatever comes. And what came to me was so I'm trying to find exactly the words, but it was like it was no, this is not the right notebook. I have like lots of notebook. I don't know if you have like lots of notebook, but I have like notebooks that I open, and like it's random sometimes. Like I start them from one angle and then I put something in the middle. But they have everything I do is there, but it's like trying to figure out the order of it. It's like impossible. But so there. Yeah, here it is. So it's so the question is, what are men if they are not raised like that? What are men if they are not raised like that? And I wrote this, my story and my life, and then this integrate me. Um, yeah, which I guess it's easier to me to resonate because I have the experience of being a soldier in the Israeli army, and that has really strong. But at a certain level, I feel that when I do this research and when I do this work, and I see other people, and I see young men born in Bavarian Germany, student, but I can see that physically they are holding all of the stuff that I was holding.
Mm. Yeah.
They completely have it in like it, and it doesn't matter that they never been and probably never be in a war. They're
Mm.
completely in it. They're completely whole. I can see myself there.
Yeah. 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 This civilization idea of civilization is such a thin patiner, isn't it? I often think how quickly it could degenerate into kind of the brutality, and has in history. Um, and what would I do in that situation? You know, I was shocked to read once. There's a guy. He's a statistician, professor of statistics, I think in Cambridge, and he wrote a play called 10 Billion, and the National Theatre put it on here, which was about actually, how when the planet has 10 billion citizens, what it's going to look like, and if we have the same kind of economy. And this is a professor. He's an academic. He's at the top of his, the tree in terms of our idea of civilization. And a journalist asked him, knowing all this, what would you teach your son or your children? And he said, I teach them to use a gun. Yeah, and I was shocked by that, and it made me think, you know, how is any of this going to change if we don't change this fear-based interaction with life? And I guess in the last few years, what I've realized that the joy of doing this work is the work. You know, that joy. You know, when it gets serious, we've missed it. We've lost what it's about. It's about the joy.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. I think that's a good note actually to end with. And this is something that came from my last conversation with Mark Weinblatt, that he was bringing this choice of being a father, and I know you're a father as well,
And grandfather, yeah.
and grandfather, and like, you know, not making compromises, somehow allowing this work to flow with life, and not be the work in which you are absent. You know, so he was bringing that, and you know, then obviously, you know, not claiming to be perfect, but and I feel like, you know, this kind of coherency, and I'm realizing that you are the fourth man I'm interviewing.
Uh-huh.
uh, I have other people on the list that are not men, and they're not but you know, I'm not also worried about it. I feel that, you know, yes, I'm interviewing white men because we have a lot of work to do. uh,
Yeah,
and
that's for sure.
and we need new models, and I feel, you know, and I'm being modest here, and you know, but I'm, you know, I feel that we are trying something new that is relevant for more people and will be relevant for the future, not just in terms of the methodologies or whatever we call this work, but in terms of being, the way of being, and you know, and yeah, and yeah, I hope, you know, I hope we're modeling a new way of being in which, you know, buying a gun is not the best option to survive.
Or maybe our own survival is not so as important and as, well, I don't know. I don't want to go into that now, but you know what I mean. It's maybe it's accepting the end, you know, and accepting it with joy, and making the most of the time we have with that joy.
Yeah.
Maybe it's too late.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. I definitely saw a world in which it's very possible. But and it's not an easy world. It's a world with a lot of mess and a lot of, because we couldn't stop the climate chaos. So it could be snowy in one day and then burning, and it's really hard to live on Earth on a physical plane. But there is a sense of union, of belonging into a global community, which is just amazing. And on the feeling level, it's an extremely powerful time to live in. And I'm not sure how much I would be able to experience it, but I know my children probably will. And the glimpse that I got, you know, it actually, I guess I feed my optimism in that, because I saw a beautiful world, a hard world, but a beautiful world in the other sense, you know, a meaningful world, much more meaningful than what I'm seeing here.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? It would be interesting to talk with an indigenous person about the idea of hope. I don't know. It's my guess, and you know, I count myself in some way ethnically as an indigenous person because I'm Welsh, you know, and the Welsh are the indigenous people of this empire, empire building, colonializing Britain. But I think, you know, maybe they have no use for hope.
Yeah, well, meet my friend Ron that we interviewed in the second episode. You can hear that, and we're doing a labyrinth of community project. soon. Uh, we once exchanged, and he said about Pandora box. You know the Pandora box myth.
Yeah.
So it's like the old evils of the world were in this box, and then they all she opened it because she was tricked into it. Let's be honest. And then the hope remained. And he said, like, well, why was hope in the first place in that box?
Exactly. That's a really good question. Yeah.
Maybe it's because hope keeps us in not now. It keeps us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what, Krishnamurti, my first teacher, would say, hope must die. And it's really radical. We have to give up. Giving up and surrendering is what happens in the labyrinth in a way. That's what happens, and then what it comes out is this incredible benevolence, and that's what's shocking, is when you actually give up hope, what you get is benevolence, grief and benevolence.
Yeah. So let's not hope. Let's just surrender.
Yeah. Which is not what you want to hear in the theater you're pressed. I surrender.
Well, I don't know. I feel that I listened again to Boal now as I'm doing this work and research, and he's in a TV show in Portuguese. I don't speak full Portuguese, but I get enough to understand. And he's asked by this talk show host, what is theater of the oppressed? And he doesn't say it's a method that I created. He started to say, we're all actors. All very human beings are actors, and every human beings are expected. So the vision about theater and life, he wasn't talking about it's a method that I created and it has different techniques. He was just speaking about how we are all actors and spectators. And so, and I have never met him, and I'm sorry I missed him. Um, but I feel it's very, very clear. And from reading and seeing what he said, I think it's very, very clear that it's not a methodology
Yeah, definitely.
to follow. It's something else. It's a path.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great talking with you, Ian, and I hope to continue this conversation, maybe in a roundtable setting and exchanging with some other people.
Some middle-aged white men gathering together.
Well, we can mix it up. I'm having a few more interviews soon with women and non-white men that I admire. And Ilaria, which is my partner, which also does this work and part of ImaginAction, will do a series of more women and embodiment work. So we're expanding, but again, like I feel like the work on the masculinity and all of that is part. And we need to put it on the table. We cannot, yeah. So sometimes I believe in putting people of color and in position of power, but not if it's to avoid us doing our work.
Yeah.
If it's an excuse for us of doing what we need to do in the inner and outer work, then I think that because we also have something. We have a work to do, and
for sure. Yeah.
Part of the world, or a part of the world are white men, and if we ignore them, if we ignore us, then they elected Trump.
Yeah.
Then if we ignore it, and the pain of it, and when I see, okay, this is probably an opening for another series, but the George Floyd video, which it's a really hard video to see. And the exercise that I've been doing when I was looking at not the whole thing, I was looking at the policeman eyes, and I was looking at it and was trying to see that assassin that lives in me.
Mm.
And what I saw, the image that I saw is of the Celtic warriors and the blood and the massacres and all the massacres and all the wars and all the bloody conflicts that has been carried out by and on white ethno for years, for many years, and how it was, and how it fear. I saw fear and terrifies and a whole, you know, a nightmare that we actually live through collectively. And we need to see that nightmare and tend for it, because otherwise it will just keep killing and violent, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I see myself very much as a kind of part of a transition team somehow, you know, like you know, I'm reading a book at the moment about in America, you know, as soon as somebody's possibly running for government, for president, they have to have a transition team in place, and they have to have lists of who will take over, because the whole kind of almost civil service changes every 4 or 8 years, so they have to teach each other like this. And with Trump, all the people were waiting for the transition team to arrive, and they never arrived. There wasn't a transition team, you know. So I see myself as part of the transition team towards a much more diverse people running the country, the world, you know. And in that process, I just become so often aware of the privilege that is invisible to me, you know. And part of the privilege is that it's invisible. Being made aware of it, it's a gift to me to work in that area, you know. Very simple, you know, it's a very simple example is, you know, my partner is British Asian and a woman, obviously, and she we were walking back home one night, and she was walking down the middle of the road, and I said, why are you walking in the middle of the road? And she said, well, you know, if I walk on the side, I won't be able to see if somebody jumps out at me. And no matter what the reality is, having that precautionary mindset doesn't even, you know, doesn't concern me at all. And how is that just a small microcosm of the macrocosm of the things people have to think about, you know, who are of a different, you know, color, or I don't even have to bother thinking about in so many different contexts. And it's just time to transition from that, and you know, all these biases that we have. And I think that's another aspect of this work is really, I talked about the illusion of separation, but mixed into all that are all these biases that we unconsciously have. Are just great to talk about openly without fear, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's another conversation.
Yeah. Yes. Let's keep it for the next one. We'll say I've been called for dinner, and I guess you also are called for dinner, and you know, yeah, sending you good wishes for all the projects. I'm really looking forward to hear and about how is it evolve this labyrinth. We should definitely talk about. And yeah, let's be connected and see. And I'm telling everyone, see you and see us in this circle conversation. And you're from Wales, so you know everything about the round table. So you can bring the table.
Yeah. Okay.
Bring the table. And so
yeah, nice to talk to you, Woody. You take care.
yeah, you too. Bye.